Hi, I'm Tessa, a veteran educator working in the field of special education.
And I'm Kim, mom of two autistic boys and a late diagnosed autistic person myself.
And welcome to Totally Over the Spectrum, where we dive into embracing autism through understanding and support.
Hi, and welcome to episode 44, where we're talking about PTSD. Do all autistic people have PTSD?
In the words of Peter, nope.
Peter's my youngest son, level 3, and non-speaking, but he can say that. Nope.
Nope. That's my favorite action and word from him. I do not believe that every autistic person has PTSD. And I don't believe that just because we're discussing it gives way to people labeling themselves with this. This is a very complex diagnosis, and we're just going to go through the different criterias and help people separate what is anxiety, what is traditional mental health issues versus what is PTSD.
Yeah, and I just want to start with a disclaimer and say we are not medical professionals. If you are suffering from mental health issues of any kind, please reach out to a qualified mental health professional. What we're doing here is sharing information that people might not know surrounding this topic, and maybe it opens up avenues of thought or doorways for people to get more information.
Yes.
So when people think about post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, they usually think about soldiers who have been in combat situations. In our last episode, we discussed some new research which suggests, if I can talk today, that traumatic events, which would typically be viewed by mild as neurotypical people, might still produce PTSD in autistic individuals. So we thought we'd dive more into PTSD. So we're going to look at some signs of PTSD in autistic people. We'll also talk about complex PTSD, which is slightly different. And at the end, we'll talk about some strategies to help you that people have said have helped them deal with PTSD. So feel free to jump to the end if you're just looking for strategies.
Also, I'd like to start off with, please give us a definition of what PTSD is.
Yeah. Also, if you are enjoying the podcast, please consider subscribing. It's completely free.
We truly appreciate it.
Yeah. Or leave us a comment about why you don't like it, and maybe we will try to do better. So first, the definition, PTSD. This is a recognized mental health issue and is defined in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. The essential feature of PTSD is the development of characteristic symptoms following exposure to one or more traumatic events. But before we talk about these characteristic symptoms, I think it's important to say that currently PTSD is estimated to be experienced by about 4% of the general population. In the autistic community, that number is closer to 45%.
It's a huge jump.
So that might not be all autistic people, but that is a huge number.
It definitely is a significant amount.
And it is probably even higher than that. So when you start reading about the personal experiences of autistic in the autistic community, and there are so many people who are first diagnosed with PTSD and then go back later and also get an autism diagnosis. Why?
Good question. I believe that a lot of the times there's overlapping symptoms which can mask themselves, pardon the pun, in order to be able to provide an accurate diagnosis for both PTSD and autism.
Yeah, there are a lot of similarities between the two. Things like sensory sensitivities. So heightened sensitivity to stimuli. That can be sounds and lights and smells. Everyone knows by now how I feel about smells if they've watched any of our other episodes. Crowded places, any sensory input, basically.
And I think also magnified is that the social interactions that are so draining can often lead to a misconception between autism and PTSD.
Yeah, social anxiety, avoidance, also emotional regulation. Being able to regulate your emotions when you are in a state of distress is difficult, if not impossible. And it can lead to meltdowns or shutdowns, which we discussed in a previous episode, so I'll put a link to that. It can also lead to anxiety and depression, which we know a tremendous number of autistic people suffer from.
Yes. And the misdiagnosis also really, it hinders appropriate treatment processes.
Yeah, I have one last similarity, and then we will jump into that, and that is the repetitive behaviors. We generally call autistic repetitive behaviors stimming when we're talking about autism, but in both autism and PTSD, the repetitive behaviors are for self-regulation,
which can often, once again, be misdiagnosed.
So yeah, you can see, looking at those similarities, how someone who is not well versed in autism and PTSD can misdiagnose PTSD.
Yeah, it is.
Because it could be both.
And often is.
Yes.
You just have to see what are your main triggers that are highlighting one over the other.
So why do so many autistic people have both?
Well, I think a lot of research goes to show that the isolation factor is one of the key. From what of the research that I've done is they feel isolated, and these boundaries that are often not just stretched, but to the point of healthy learning, but stretched to the point of total dysregulation, is what triggers a lot of post-traumatic stress symptoms in autistic people.
Yeah, I have down trauma exposure. Basically, autistic individuals are more likely to experience traumatic events throughout their lifetime. You get bullying, abuse, social exclusion, like you said. There's also social vulnerability. So having social interaction and social communication difficulties increases the risk of victimization.
Yep. And I think the fact that so many of people with autism experience mental health condition, it impacts their overall well-being, which then once again contributes to a higher level of PTSD.
You also have stigma and discrimination, which I think is pretty self-explanatory. People know within a few minutes of meeting you, or even a few seconds of meeting you, that you're different, and they often judge you harshly for it, unless you're really good at masking, which in itself can cause PTSD. So either way, you're pretty much screwed. Yeah.
It's funny that as we discuss all of the symptoms and the traits, it's this back and forth. It's saying, okay, this happens in autism, this happens in PTSD, this happens in autism, this happens in PTSD. It is really, really difficult to differentiate between the two. And once again, it just reinstates that you need somebody who is very well adversed in both PTSD and autism in order to provide an accurate diagnosis.
Yeah. I didn't know a tremendous amount about PTSD symptoms until I started researching this. And I didn't know that perseveration was another aspect of it. And that is basically going back and rethinking about negative experiences, or what you imagine might have been a negative experience, because you're often not sure if you've said or done something wrong. So you just sort of replay conversations over and over again. And I don't know a single autistic person who doesn't do this. You just keep reliving the crap that's already happened to you, and it doesn't matter how long ago it was. It's like your brain, for no apparent reason, just randomly picks the moment when you were 9, and you use the word hereditary, and your friend looks at you and says, "Why do you talk like that? Like, why can't you just say it runs in the family?" And to this day, I still think hereditary isn't really a fancy word, is it? And to me, surely it's more accurate and succinct to use the word hereditary rather than it runs in the family. And I can't seem to let it go.
I can think of a lot of people out there would say, well, that's happened to me, but I'm not autistic, and I definitely not have PTSD. So what is the threshold that takes that experience and at what point do you cross that threshold for it to be then diagnosed as PTSD? And I don't think we have the answers to that, but a professional certainly would be able to do that for you.
I think it's because it's not one thing. A lot of neurotypical people will say, oh, well, I have that too. So we're all a little autistic. No, not all a little autistic. Nope. It has to do with the intensity and the combination of all of the things, not just one thing, but it's the intensity. I don't think there are a lot of neurotypical people out there who perseverate on the daily.
Okay.
You probably have a conversation with someone and you don't go away and you rethink that conversation for the next 4 or 5 days because you think you might have slipped up somewhere.
Well, I'm glad that we're having this conversation, because now it's giving that layer of that, it's giving an actual definition to what we think, and in our discussion over here, that takes it through that threshold of PTSD.
If we talk about sensory sensitivities, I often think that neurotypical people don't really have an understanding of how intense a sensory input can be for autistic people. They'll say, "Oh yeah, that bothers me too," but I don't think they get it. So it is not a discomfort. It is an onslaught. Does that make sense?
It is catastrophic. It is a catastrophic experience.
I always try to think of examples that maybe neurotypical people can grasp the concept, because it must be very difficult to grasp a concept when you can't actually relate to it. So I was thinking, imagine you are out in a coffee shop with a friend and there's music playing in the background. So the neurotypical person notices the music, but they can sort of filter it out. They know it's there, but it's not bothersome.
Yeah, background noise. White noise.
For an autistic person, it could be like having a headache and the fire alarm goes off. And people will be like, "Oh yeah, that sounds terrible." Yeah, but it gets worse because over time, the fire alarm just keeps getting louder. So you try to explain the concept to the person you're with and like, "Oh, just ignore it, or you'll get used to it, or it's not that bad." Because they're not experiencing the intensity of it the way you are. They can't fathom that. So when meltdowns happen because of a sensory overload, it's not bad behavior. It's not us being overly dramatic. It's because we just can't take anymore. We have been really good regulating ourselves up until that point, and really deserve some credit for how often we have to fight to regulate ourselves, so that when we reach a meltdown stage, we need support because we're overloaded now. It is beyond our capability to regulate anymore.
That is a fantastic example.
Which brings me to difficulty regulating emotions. Gee, I wonder why. Not only are you struggling with the sensory input from your surroundings constantly, you have to deal with people minimizing or dismissing your experience. How could that not lead to PTSD?
Yeah, it is an impact on your core traits, right? So it depends upon to how much you are pushed on a regular basis, on a continuum. Right. That causes this threshold to be.
So it's not always PTSD. Sometimes it's complex PTSD.
It is.
So what is the difference? PTSD is defined as occurring from a single traumatic event, and complex PTSD is when you're exposed to prolonged or repeated traumatic events. Pretty much every day can be traumatic for autistic people.
It can, but often we've had this discussion, at some point it is also life.
Yeah, life is hard.
And you've often said that to me, and you've gone, "Well, yeah," and I go, "Well," and you go, "That's just life, Tess. I learned to cope with it, and I learned to deal with it." And sometimes I just sit there with deer in the headlights looking at you like, okay.
I'm not suggesting that is the healthy way to cope with it. That is just my particular coping mechanism.
Yes.
So let's talk about some strategies then. So effective treatment for autistic individuals experiencing PTSD or complex PTSD is usually going to involve adapting current treatments to that person's specific needs.
Yeah. Tailor-made treatment is going to be crucial in order to provide you with the necessary tools that you need. And because each case is individual and each situation has to be tailored, the strategies have to be tailor-made for those specific situations and circumstances so that person can implement them.
Yeah, so you need to find a clinician who is not only experienced with PTSD, but is also experienced in adapting treatments specifically to autistic individuals.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, I'm going to be a little bit blunt here. Good luck finding that. It is really, really difficult to find somebody who is well-versed in both.
Don't give up hope.
No, don't. So my suggestion, because, my squirrel brain, my ADHD brain, goes, you get the best of both worlds. You get a person who specifically helps with autism, and you pair them up with somebody who is very well-versed in PTSD. And the combination of the two is going to give you the best of both worlds. So, ta-da!
So the different strategies that I found that the autistic community is using or has used, because I like to read actual experiences that people have done, and then I feel like there are lots of strategies out there that people are like, oh, use this and use that, but I like to hear from the autistic community and what they've used and what they have experienced and what they think is actually beneficial.
Okay.
So the first one that I found was trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy.
Okay, that was the top of my list.
Okay, so explain what that is.
Depending upon the person who is going to be implementing is the ability to be able to connect with an emotion, is, from my understanding, to be able to connect with the emotion and understand where its place lies and the tools on how to regulate while dealing with that emotion.
So you can imagine that if it is not adapted, that is probably not going to work for a lot of autistic people, especially people like me who have alexithymia, which means I don't know how I'm feeling at any given point during the day. So I might not be able to describe what that emotion is. I might not recognize what that emotion is.
So this is when a behavioral therapist is going to be able to give you the words and give you the descriptions, and for you to be able to try and match that or present to you saying, this is my observation. When we talk about this or this occurs, your body responds in this manner, or you vocalize in this manner. And having a therapist be able to point that out to you is going to help you bridge that connection in understanding.
I think what I really liked about this particular cognitive behavioral therapy is that it was originally developed for children and can be adapted to autistic adults. And I think that that's important because it's not that I think that you need to infantilize autistic people. It's that they're approaching it as if that person might not be able to identify those emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So the next one I have is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR.
Okay, go for it.
So I've read quite a few positive autistic experiences with this. It is led by the autistic individual, and it can be adapted to different cognitive abilities. And it involves stimulating the left and right sides of the body at the same time while processing traumatic memories. And the stimulation is usually eye movement, but it can be hand tapping or using sound. But it doesn't always rely on talking about the trauma.
Yeah. It does not always rely on it. And there are also different forms of holistic providers that do offer the same type of service from a different approach. And I always like to be able to provide people with an array of opportunities in which they can self-help or have someone guide them through this. So please go out there and do some research on that one.
We've been talking about adapting it, but I think it's important to talk about what those adaptations might actually look like.
Okay.
Practically. It could be as simple as having a safe and predictable environment with sensory accommodations like lighting or seating, or having virtual sessions if possible. It could also be recognizing and adapting to autistic communication differences or learning differences. So breaking down tasks into smaller steps or using visual aids not asking open-ended questions like, how are you feeling? And also addressing co-occurring conditions like anxiety and depression.
Those are excellent strategies. One of the other strategies is also weighted strategies, in which having like a weighted blanket being placed on you, or you placing it on yourself, depending upon your level of ability over there. And it just helps you feel from, for those out there who experience this and can relate to that, can you please comment? We appreciate that. Having that weight feels that they are more grounded, as in physically grounded. They don't feel like their bodies are floating away, and they're far better able to regulate as a result of that. So it's weighted therapy.
There you go. The next one I have is medication. And some people may require medication to manage their anxiety or depression or even insomnia in order for the PTSD treatment that they're using to be successful. So sometimes you have to take care of some of these other things that are going on before the PTSD treatment is going to be effective.
One of the key considerations that I have is early recognition and intervention is going to be key for anybody experiencing any form of mental health issues, which is coupled with PTSD. This is going to be crucial.
The last one I have is peer support. Being able to connect with other autistic people who have had similar experiences can be really validating and help you to feel not so alone and so isolated.
This is one of the triggering events that a lot of autistic people speak about, is that isolation piece is what creates the mental health concerns that they have, anxiety, depression, and the repeated exposure to that then elevates it to that next level of possible PTSD.
The only last thing I had to note is that we really need more research into the efficacy of these adapted therapies for autistic individuals.
And in doing that as well, I said future research is key. However, the development of this future research and therapies is going to be really, really important with the aid of an autistic person taking the helm on this.
Yeah, I don't know why you would try to create a therapy for autistic people without consulting autistic people. Doesn't that just seem stupid?
Counterproductive, yeah.
Yeah,
it does.
Okay.
So, yeah. And I think that's all I have on my list over here.
Yep, that's all I have.
Okay. So what have we got next?
Our next podcast, we're going to be talking about de-stressing techniques that actually work.
Well, because this was a heavy subject that we spoke about, right? PTSD. So we've helped, give you the tools to what it's all about and how to go about getting some help. So this is just that next added layer of helping you de-stress and put some great mechanisms in place.
There you go.
Okay. Till then, have a great day.
We'll see you then. Thanks for tuning in. If you know someone who might find this episode helpful, feel free to share. Also, check out our website and socials linked in the description.